When I stood up for a cause I believe in, I never imagined it would put me in the crosshairs of something terrifying. It all started on an unremarkable Tuesday, the kind of day where the sun hangs lazily in the sky and the routines of mundane life press ever forward. I was scrolling through various social media feeds when an old friend of mine was live streaming from an animal shelter that had fallen into disrepair. The animals were malnourished, and the building was literally falling apart. Heartbroken, I noticed a group of rallying supporters forming online, determined to raise awareness for the animals who had been rescued and needed homes. Their posts filled my feed, and the passionate cries for help ignited a fire in my gut. Without much thought, I decided to become actively involved, believing fiercely in their cause. I started sharing posts, encouraging people to adopt instead of shop, and organized a small fundraiser, merchandise themed around saving animals, where the profits went directly to the shelter. Bit by bit, the movement gained traction, and people began to show up at the shelter to volunteer, fostering, and adopt. It felt like we were making a difference, that our collective voice was echoing through the community. But just as I felt the warmth of success, a shadow suddenly crept over my enthusiasm. Rumors began swirling about a new owner of the shelter. The former manager, who had mysteriously vanished months prior, was seen lurking around at night, ignoring our signs for help and swatting away our volunteers like flies. I brushed it off initially, thinking they were just stupid urban legends fabricated by bored kids, but the signs began to get weirder. One night, I stayed late to help with a fundraising event, and as I was cleaning up, I saw him, a tall, gaunt figure out of the corner of my eye, creeping along the perimeter of the shelter. My heart raced as he approached, his eyes glimmering with something unidentifiable, something dead. I tried to confront him, but he vanished into the shadowy corners of the building before I could muster a coherent sentence. It unnerved me, but I refused to be discouraged. After all, I was fighting for a cause bigger than myself. Days turned into weeks, and more strange events followed. I started receiving bizarre hate messages on social media, anonymous threats from opposing accounts, accusing me of complicity in animal trafficking and warning me to back off from the shelter. Each message dug deeper than the last, but I was fueled by my commitment, so I counted this as a win for awareness. That's when it reached a boiling point. One night, the shelter was vandalized. Windows were shattered, and heartbreaking images of our beloved animals were spray-painted over the walls. I was furious but also terrified. It was clear now, someone wanted to sabotage our cause. I called an emergency meeting with the other volunteers, and we brainstormed ways to make our movement even bolder. We planned a protest scheduled for a Friday, intending to overshoot our goals. We made signs, chanting, "Save the animals," with voices melding into a roaring sea of hope and determination, but nothing prepared me for the chaos that would soon ensue. I returned from the meeting, planning to rest up. That night, however, I awoke to the sound of scratching outside my window. I thought it was just a stray cat, but when I looked out, my eyes locked onto him, the gaunt figure. Standing right outside my house, his gaze fixated on me, unmoving. Shivers trickled down my spine, and I stumbled back, closing the blinds. The next morning, my heart felt heavier, but I was not going to let fear win. I resolved to bring the fight to the streets, ignited by the thought of helpless animals needing protection. The day of the protest arrived, dozens showed up, united behind our cause. We marched in formation, chanting with conviction, but as we turned onto the corner, something strange happened. The air felt electric, like the atmosphere was charged with dread. Suddenly, from nowhere, a group of individuals in dark hoodies emerged, forming a barrier in front of us. Their leader, a burly man with a wild beard and eyes screaming madness, shouted, "This place is ours. You think you can just come in and take what we built? You'll pay for this." I felt a cold sweat enveloping me. The crowd was anxious now, the unnerving standoff grew thicker with tension, and I found the strength to step forward, yelling, "You don't own these animals. They deserve a chance." My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins as the crowd surged behind me, chanting our mantra louder, more defiantly. But I never expected him to react the way he did. The man pulled a crowbar from his belt and charged at me, shouting obscenities. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching a horror movie unfold but was stuck inside the frame. I ducked just in time, the heavy metal whistling past my ear, only narrowly missing me as I crumpled forward. The crowd erupted in chaos, screams pierced the air as people began to scatter. Amid the panic, I spotted the tall, gaunt figure right behind me, now gifting a chilling smile that sent terror bubbling deep in my gut. "You shouldn't have stood up," he hissed, eyes blazing with malice. Before I could scream, he lunged at me, grabbing a fistful of my shirt just as I felt others beside me fighting him and the crowd vice-grip past us. In the mayhem, I felt my legs give out as I was dragged backward. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the police began to arrive, sirens blaring, chaotic lights illuminating our park that once embodied freedom. They separated us, and the leaders of the opposing side were cuffed and pulled away, their faces twisted in fury. I was left trembling, full of shock but somehow relieved. Moments later, when I finally caught my breath, it hit me: despite the fears and physical danger, we made an impact. Hours turned into days, and that terrifying encounter transformed into calls for justice. Community support skyrocketed. More media attention came our way, and rather miraculously, the shelter underwent a complete transformation, renovated, revitalized, everything shifting toward positivity. Today, when I stand in front of the shelter, I see a home, an oasis for abandoned animals. And every time I walk through those doors, I remember the price we paid for this sanctuary is a testament of strength. Each time I hear the soft paws patter against the floor, I understand that standing up for what we believe in may cost us everything, but the outcome of courage and love. That is a price worth paying. So when someone asks me if I'd ever do it again, I smile softly and reflect, you better believe it. I could hear the rain tapping against the window as I sat at the edge of my bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to drown out the nagging feeling in my gut. Sarah had been my best friend for years, and for most of that time, I felt like we shared everything: laughs, secrets, even those awkward moments that only best friends can relate to. But lately, something had changed. It was like a shadow had stretched itself over our friendship, and I couldn't figure out why. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. The last few times I had hung out with her, she seemed distant, caught in her own world, and for me, it was painful to watch. Today, she had invited me over, and I felt like it was finally time to address the elephant in the room. I arrived at her place just as the rain began to pour harder, an uninvited reminder of the storm brewing in my chest. I knocked on the door, and after what felt like an eternity, she opened it, her hair damp and disheveled, her face showing signs of fatigue. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile that barely met her eyes. I stepped in, the warmth of her apartment wrapping around me like a blanket, but it didn't warm my heart. We made small talk for a few moments, but the words felt empty. I could feel the tension crackling between us, and I knew I had to break the spell. "Sarah, can we talk?" I said, my voice shaky. She looked at me, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Yeah, of course," she replied, leading me to the living room. We settled on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between us feeling almost insurmountable. I took a deep breath, deciding to take the plunge. "I've noticed you've been different lately. Is something going on that you want to share?" Her eyes flickered with a pain that made my heart sink, and for a moment, I thought she might just shut down. But then, she sighed and looked away towards the rain-soaked window. "I guess I've just been feeling overwhelmed," she said quietly. "Life has thrown a lot at me lately, and I didn't want you to worry." I shifted slightly, trying to catch her gaze, but she was lost in her own thoughts. "You're my best friend, Sarah. You don't have to go through this alone. I want to help you. Please don't shut me out." The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy, and I could see her fighting against whatever it was she was keeping inside. At last, she broke, tears spilling down her cheeks, the dam of her guarded emotions bursting open. "It's just everything feels like too much," she said, her voice trembling. "I lost my job last month, and I've been feeling so anxious about what comes next. I'm embarrassed to tell you. I didn't want to be a burden." My heart ached for her. "You could never be a burden to me. We all go through tough times. Let me be here for you, like you've always been there for me." Sarah looked at me, her eyes glistening with gratitude and shame, a mixture of vulnerability that reminded me of how much our friendship meant. "I didn't want to ruin what we had," she murmured, the walls she had built around her crumbling. "But in trying to protect you, I pushed you away." The truth of her words hit me hard, and I realized that in my pursuit to be strong for her, I had started to build walls of my own, walls that kept me from truly seeing her struggles. "It's okay to not be okay," I said gently. We can lean on each other. You're allowed to feel this way. We spent the next several hours talking, sharing raw feelings and heartaches we had both buried under laughter and light banter. Sarah told me about her fears of job hunting, her long-standing battle with anxiety, and how she had felt like she was losing herself in the chaos of it all. I shared my own insecurities, my worries about failures, about feeling lost in my own life. The rain continued to pound against the window, but inside, the air was thick with catharsis and understanding. We were peeling back layers we had kept hidden, and with every confession that left our lips, I felt a bond rekindling, the fire of our friendship reigniting with a warm glow. By the time the sun began to set, casting a golden hue in the room, the conversation shifted from despair to hope. We made plans to support each other in our respective journeys, agreeing that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength that could only serve to deepen our connection. "Thank you for pushing me," Sarah said as we hugged tightly, tears still coursing down her cheeks but now mixed with smiles. "I always felt like I had to carry all this alone, and now I realize I don't." I pulled back, looking into her eyes, knowing I had made the right choice. "You're never alone," I promised. "And if we get through this together, we can face anything life throws at us." That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on how a difficult conversation had transformed our relationship. The storm outside had calmed, and along with it, the tempest of emotions inside us both had ebbed and flowed into a gentle river of understanding. Sarah and I had always been close, but now we were bonded by something deeper, something that came from honesty and the willingness to confront our own vulnerabilities. I fell asleep with a lighter heart and the images of our talks replaying in my mind, knowing that what had started as a struggle had turned into a reminder that true friendship endures through the darkest storm. The rain had washed away our barriers, leaving behind a stronger bond where love and authenticity flowed freely. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation that would change my life forever, but there I was, standing in a dimly lit room, surrounded by strangers, 6 of them to be exact, and we were all crammed into what might as well have been a haunted house. Instead, it was a dilapidated cabin somewhere deep in the woods, far away from civilization. My heart raced, not just from the ghostly ambience but because we were there for a purpose. Each of us had received a strange invite to this group. I wasn't even sure how they found me. Just like everyone else in the room, we all felt this bizarre pull to be there, drawn by the promise of learning how to communicate better in dire circumstances. I should have known it would turn ugly. The 5 others introduced themselves, their faces reflecting a spectrum of mixed emotions, nervousness, excitement, and a hint of dread. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made you feel like you were perpetually on the edge of your seat. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect as our focus turned to the host, a lanky man who introduced himself as Jacob. He looked the part of a charlatan, all disheveled hair and eyes that darted around like he was trying to make sense of his own ideas. Without preamble, he began to explain that we were there to participate in a radical form of communication training. As he spoke, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. There were rumors swirling around our town about Jacob, a man known for orchestrating bizarre social experiments that often ended in chaos. It was almost like he craved unpredictability, creating tense scenarios to stress-test relationships. Before I could process my thoughts, Jacob dropped the bombshell: we'd be simulating a dangerous hostage situation. The rules were simple: we had to communicate effectively to defuse the situation and successfully rescue a presumably captured person, who Jacob would appoint. My heart sank. Was this really what I signed up for? But before I could voice my dissent, he announced the first exercise. He instructed one of the others, a calm-looking woman who introduced herself as Lily, to act as the hostage. The rest of us had to roleplay as the negotiators, and tensions soared the moment the fake gun was introduced. Jacob acted as the threat, pacing like a caged animal with that maniacal glint in his eyes. The chaos unfolded rapidly. I remember clearly trying to communicate in a way that would resonate with the threat, my palms sweating profusely as I fumbled through my words. The reality was terrifying. Despite being a simulated exercise, it felt real. Lily's eyes widened in fear, the pretend scenario taking on a life of its own. Jacob stared us down with unyielding intensity, demanding we find common ground with the hostage-taker. I struggled, feeling the weight of the group's expectations as I attempted to maintain composure. Voices clashed in the fray, everybody clamoring for their chance to talk. The more we spoke, the angrier Jacob became, wielding his gun in exaggerated wild movements while mocking our attempts. The energy shifted sharply to chaos. At one point, I yelled out, desperate to be heard. I remember looking at Jacob, his twisted smile sending chills down my spine, as he pointed his prop weapon at me. As we floundered and fought, I noticed another participant, a quiet guy named Mark, who seemed to be observing rather than participating. I felt a strange kinship with him, but even then, any thoughts of camaraderie were drowned in the overwhelming anxiety of the scenario. The cries grew louder. There was a distinct chance that we could all emerge worse than we entered this labyrinth of manipulation, but as feelings of frustration escalated into palpable fear, something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, commanding attention in a shaky voice. Wait. Everyone, stop. We need to breathe. Time seemed to freeze for just a moment as the shifting faces turned toward me with a mix of confusion and hope. I didn't even know where this newfound courage came from, but the words flowed. This isn't helping anyone. Jacob, you're being too aggressive. We're not going to get anywhere this way. The air shifted, the tension dissipating like steam from a pot. Jacob's smile faltered for just a second, and I seized the opportunity to elaborate. I directed my gaze at Lily, linking eyes with her. I whispered, we're going to get you out of here. We just need to talk. The others echoed this sentiment, and for the first time in hours, everyone appeared willing to collaborate. Jacob stood there, looking bewildered, as if the very essence of the exercise was unraveling before his eyes. I realized that's all I had to do, intervene when things spiraled and bridge the gap with heartfelt communication. It wasn't just about the words, it was the spirit behind them. I gathered myself, looking at each face and sharing the truth of our shared experience. We were all scared. Jacob's demeanor shifted, his game revealed. The situation didn't have to maintain this frantic pace. As our collective anxiety began to change its shape, Jacob, rather than fighting it, something shifted in him too. He dropped the facade, nodding slowly, biting his lip as if working through a revelation of his own. One by one, others began to reflect on their feelings, sharing genuine vulnerabilities. We were no longer just role-playing, we were building a bridge. As the night drew on, the timer, which had been counting down, blinked successively to 0. It was the first time I felt authentic communication flowing in a way I had only hoped it would. It wasn't just a lesson about techniques or strategies, it was a raw glimpse into human connection. To my shock, Jacob, who had been so set on chaos, admitted that his entire experiment had come from a place of fear, his own doubts about interpersonal relationships, something almost unfathomable given his earlier demeanor. It became clear we were all fighting battles that needed our voices to transcend them. Communication is not simply about being articulate, it's about vulnerability, understanding, and knowing when to step back. The hostage scenario ended, but my lessons had just begun. After that night, I found myself reaching out in ways I'd never imagined. I transformed how I navigated conflict, how I connected with loved ones, and how I truly listened. Even when I left that dilapidated cabin, the most haunting realization lingered. Learning to communicate effectively isn't just a skill, it's a profound journey that intertwines with the very core of who we are. The truth is, I walked in expecting a shallow list of tricks. Instead, I stumbled upon raw honesty, and in that little cabin in the woods, I found the courage to face not only others but also my own fears. Ultimately, that night taught me the most crucial lesson of all. In difficult situations, it's not so much about winning a conversation as it is about nurturing the human connection. I still carry that with me today, trying to communicate effectively, even in the midst of a storm. The Gift That Ruined Christmas, a Family Feud. The Gift That Ruined Christmas, a Family Feud. The Christmas I'll never forget started with the best of intentions, as these things often do, and spiraled into something I couldn't have imagined even in my worst holiday nightmares. It had always been a sacred tradition in our family to gather at my grandparents' house every year, no matter the weather, no matter how far we had to travel. The air would be filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, the halls decorated with garlands and fairy lights, and the living room practically bursting with presents under the enormous tree. My grandmother, ever the meticulous hostess, ensured everything ran smoothly, from the perfectly cooked Christmas ham to the carefully orchestrated gift exchange. But that year, a single present managed to unravel decades of tradition and harmony, sparking a feud that tore through our family like a raging wildfire. It began innocently enough. We were all gathered around the tree, sipping on eggnog and laughing at Uncle Joe's terrible dad jokes, when my cousin Emily handed out the last gift. It was a small, tastefully wrapped box, and it had my Uncle Greg's name on it. Emily, ever the prankster, flashed a mischievous grin as she passed it to him. Everyone leaned in, intrigued, expecting another one of her infamous joke gifts. Uncle Greg raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. He carefully peeled away the wrapping paper, revealing a sleek black box. His eyes widened when he saw the name on the lid, Heritage DNA. "You didn't," he said, half amused, half nervous. Emily giggled. "I did. Come on, you've been talking about wanting to trace our roots for ages. Now you can do it." The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, everyone speculating about what Uncle Greg's ancestry results might reveal. But beneath the surface, something shifted. My dad's face grew pale, and I noticed my grandmother's smile tighten, the joy draining from her eyes. At the time, I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to the general chaos of Christmas morning. But the tension that settled over the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Uncle Greg chuckled awkwardly, putting the box aside. "Thanks, Emily. I'll, definitely check it out later," he said, but the way his voice wavered made my stomach knot. For a moment, the festivities resumed, though with an odd undercurrent of unease. But when my grandmother suddenly excused herself and disappeared into the kitchen, my dad followed her, his brow furrowed with concern. The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if we should intervene or pretend nothing was wrong. Being the nosy person I am, I decided to investigate. I quietly made my way to the kitchen, careful not to draw attention to myself, and listened in on their hushed conversation. "How could she do this?" my grandmother was saying, her voice cracking. "After everything we've worked to keep hidden." "Mom, calm down," my dad whispered, though he sounded anything but calm. "We don't even know if he'll go through with it. It might mean nothing. Or it could mean everything," my grandmother snapped. "Our whole family. It could all come crashing down." My heart raced, and I stepped back, trying to process what I'd just overheard. Hidden secrets. A family history they were desperate to keep buried? It was like something out of a soap opera, but this was real, and it was happening right in front of me. When I returned to the living room, the atmosphere had grown even frostier. Uncle Greg, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the kitchen, was laughing with my aunts and uncles, but it felt forced, like everyone was trying too hard to maintain the facade of Christmas cheer. Later that evening, after dinner, the tension boiled over. My dad pulled Uncle Greg aside, and I saw them talking in the corner, their voices growing louder with each passing minute. "Just don't do it," my dad was saying, his voice tinged with desperation. "You don't know what you're getting into." Uncle Greg's face darkened. "What's your problem?" he snapped. "It's a harmless test. I just want to know where we come from. Why are you acting so weird?" My dad's jaw clenched, and he glanced nervously around the room, where the rest of the family was pretending not to listen. "It's not harmless," he hissed. "There are things better left buried." The room fell silent, all eyes on the two of them. Emily, looking horrified, tried to interject. "Guys, I didn't mean to start anything. It was just a gift, for fun." But my dad wasn't listening. "You have no idea what kind of damage this could do," he said, his voice breaking. Uncle Greg glared at him, his fists clenched. "What are you so afraid of?" he demanded. "What are you hiding?" And then, to everyone's shock, my grandmother stormed into the room, her face pale and eyes blazing. "Enough," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger and something that looked like fear. "If you must know the truth, then fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the youngest kids, who had been playing with their new toys, stopped and stared. My grandmother took a deep breath, and I could see the weight of whatever secret she was about to reveal pressing down on her. "Years ago," she began, her voice wavering, "before any of you were born, there was a situation. A mistake, one that could have ruined us. We thought we'd put it behind us, but this DNA test, it could bring everything back." My heart pounded as she went on, detailing a sordid story of an affair, a hidden pregnancy, and a family cover-up that sounded like something out of a crime novel. Apparently, one of our uncles, an uncle we'd grown up with, loved, and called family, might not be related to us by blood. The details were hazy, and she clearly left out parts she couldn't bear to say out loud, but the damage was done. The room erupted into chaos. Accusations were hurled, tears were shed, and the Warm glow of Christmas had been extinguished, replaced by a bitter, icy storm of betrayal. Emily was sobbing, blaming herself for the fallout, while Uncle Greg sat in stunned silence, clutching the DNA kit like it was a grenade that had just gone off in his hands. My dad and my grandmother were at odds, their alliance shattered as old wounds were ripped open. I watched as our family, the one that had always seemed so strong and united, crumbled before my eyes. It was a scene I never thought I'd witness, the kind of drama you read about in books or watch in movies but never expect to happen to you. Christmas was officially ruined, not by a lack of gifts or a burnt dinner, but by the revelation of secrets that had been festering beneath the surface for decades. The fallout lasted for months. Some family members stopped speaking to each other, alliances were formed, and a cold war of sorts gripped our once tight-knit group. The DNA test eventually confirmed my grandmother's worst fears, but by then, the damage had already been done. The Christmas that had started with laughter and love had ended in heartbreak and division, and no amount of holiday cheer could ever patch the wounds left behind. The family dinner that turned into chaos, here's what went down. It was supposed to be a normal family dinner, one of those rare occasions when everyone managed to carve out some time to come together, share a meal, and catch up. My mom had spent the whole afternoon cooking, her famous lasagna, homemade garlic bread, and, of course, the huge pot of her secret recipe pasta sauce. It had all the makings of a warm, comforting evening. But as soon as I stepped into the house, something felt off. You know that feeling when the air just seems heavier than usual, like something is lurking just beneath the surface? That was how it felt when I walked in. The usual chatter was missing. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone, not even acknowledging my presence when I said hello. My older brother, Mark, was pacing in the living room, his face tight with frustration. My younger sister, Emma, was sitting at the table, poking at her food, barely making eye contact with anyone. And then, of course, there was Aunt Kathy, who was already on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, probably arguing with one of her exes again. At first, I thought maybe it was just a fluke, maybe a bad day at work or something small that had gotten everyone on edge. But as the evening went on, the tension grew, thickening in the air like smoke. I tried to make small talk, asking Mark how work was, joking with Emma about her latest online shopping spree, but the responses were clipped, uninterested. My mom, bless her heart, was desperately trying to keep the atmosphere light, but I could tell she was stressed. She kept glancing at my dad, as if waiting for him to say something, to join the conversation, but he remained silent, scrolling through his phone with that same detached look on his face. Then, it happened. The moment that would turn everything upside down. Aunt Kathy, after finishing her phone call, hung up and slapped the phone down on the table with a little more force than necessary. The sound of the slap made everyone freeze. She looked around the table with a sly grin on her face, as if she had just uncovered some deep, dark family secret. "I know what you've all been hiding," she said, her voice low but full of mischief. I was about to ask what she meant when my dad finally spoke up, his voice strained, like he was trying to keep his anger in check. "What the hell are you talking about, Kathy?" My aunt's grin only widened. "You think I haven't figured it out? You've all been keeping secrets from me. From the family. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did." Everyone was staring at her now, and I could feel my heart rate increase. What was she talking about? What secrets? My dad shot up from his chair, knocking it over in the process. "Stop making shit up, Kathy. There's nothing going on, all right?" But Kathy wasn't backing down. "Oh, really? Then explain this." She pulled a small envelope from her purse and slammed it on the table. My mom's face went white as she saw the envelope. "Kathy, don't," but it was too late. Kathy had already opened it, revealing a stack of papers. They were financial documents. I wasn't exactly sure what they were at first, but the look on my mom's face told me everything I needed to know. "What the hell is this?" Mark demanded, his voice sharp. "What are you trying to pull, Aunt Kathy?" Aunt Kathy didn't answer him. She just smirked, watching my mom, waiting for her to react. And then, in that moment, it clicked for me. I had seen those papers before. They were from a lawyer's office. And my mom had been avoiding going through them for weeks. But I had no idea why, and I had no idea that Kathy even knew about them. My mom stood up suddenly, pushing her chair back so hard it nearly toppled over. "I told you, Kathy, not to bring this up. I asked you to leave it alone. My dad stood too, his hands clenched into fists. This isn't the time, Kathy. You've got no business going through our things. It's none of your goddamn business. But Kathy wasn't backing down. Oh, I think it is my business. You think I don't know about your little business dealings behind our backs? The money you've been hiding? The debts you've been trying to pay off with dirty money? That's when everything exploded. My mom started shouting, but I couldn't hear her words over the roar of my dad's anger. Mark, always the peacemaker, tried to step in and calm everyone down, but it wasn't working. Everyone was yelling, accusing each other of things I couldn't quite understand, throwing around words like betrayal, lies, and secrets. I was standing there, frozen, caught in the middle of something that had gone from 0 to 60 in seconds. My mind was racing. What was Kathy talking about? What did she mean by dirty money? And why had my parents kept this from me? I turned to look at my mom, who was standing there, her face a mask of shame and anger. I'd never seen her like this before. Mom, I said quietly, almost afraid to hear her answer. What's going on? What's this all about? My mom shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. It's not what you think. It's not, she broke off, unable to finish her sentence. And then, in the most unexpected turn of events, my dad spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it. You deserve to know, I guess. He paused, looking at each of us in turn. There's a reason I've been so distant. There's a reason I've been shutting you all out. I've been trying to protect you from what's been happening. He glanced at Kathy, his face filled with disgust. I made some bad choices years ago. And I've been paying for them ever since. Kathy's laugh was sharp and cold. Bad choices. You mean illegal choices. My dad didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face tense, his hands still clenched into fists. My heart sank. I had always seen my dad as this strong, invincible figure. The one who protected us. The one who had it all, together. And now, standing there, I realized I didn't know who he really was. The truth came out in pieces, as everyone started yelling over one another. It turned out that my dad had been involved in some shady business dealings, trying to fix some bad investments and, ultimately, got caught up in something he couldn't get out of. And Kathy, well, she had known about it all along. She had been the one to warn him to come clean, but he never did. She'd been trying to protect us from the fallout, but it was too late now. The damage had already been done. The family dinner that was supposed to be a time to catch up and share laughs turned into a full-blown confrontation, a chaotic mess of secrets, lies, and accusations. The rest of the evening was a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and questions that didn't have any answers. Mark ended up storming out, unable to handle the tension any longer. Aunt Kathy left, too, but not before saying something I'll never forget. You'll all be fine. But your dad. He's going to pay for what he's done. And so will you. The words haunted me long after she left, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was just beginning. It's been weeks since that dinner, and things haven't been the same since. The secrets are out in the open, and nothing will ever be the same. My family is broken, but we're all still here, trying to pick up the pieces. But what happened that night, what was said, will haunt me for a long time. And no matter how hard we try to move on, I don't think we'll ever forget the night that a simple family dinner turned into something we could never undo. I never believed in life coaches. For me, they were just glorified motivational speakers, people who preyed on your vulnerabilities and sold hollow promises wrapped in shiny self-help packages. I used to scoff at those who paid hundreds for advice about self-discovery, but that all changed one fateful evening in mid-January. It was one of those bleak, cold nights when the world feels heavy. I was stuck in a rut, drowning in a sea of regrets and uncertainties about my life choices. I had just come from a failed job interview, another blow to my dwindling self-esteem. Defeated, I took a walk to clear my head, but instead, I found myself wandering into a cafe I had never seen before. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and there were a few people scattered around, some tapping away on their laptops and others lost in conversation. An odd sign on the wall caught my eye, tonight's special, a free life coaching session. I chuckled to myself, contemplating the absurdity of it all. But I was curious, what could a stranger possibly tell me that I didn't already know? Yet, out of sheer boredom and desperation, I decided to stay. Soon enough, a woman named Clara entered, radiating an unsettling mix of energy and calm. She was dressed in vibrant colors, with an aura that suggested she had plucked it straight from a better world. Clara stood in front of us, exuding confidence, her easy smile breaking the ice. Without any introduction, she launched into her spiel about the power of perspective, of embracing the unknown, and stepping out of our comfort zones. I felt my skepticism creeping back in, but then she looked at me directly. "You, my friend, seem like you're carrying a heavy weight," she said, and I felt an involuntary shiver. Even in a room full of strangers, she made it seem like I was the only one who mattered. Clara began asking questions, probing my mind like a skilled surgeon. Without even realizing it, I was sharing parts of my life I had tucked away, my fear of failure, my past relationships that ended in heartache, my dreams that seemed to drift further away with each passing year. It felt surreal, therapeutic even. By the end of the session, I found myself captivated, a complete shift occurring in my perspective. She talked about the concept of the invisible wall we build around ourselves, how it blocks us from the opportunities life throws our way. It was as if she was staring deep into my soul, unveiling every hidden insecurity I had buried over the years. The session wrapped up with a challenge. Clara invited each of us to do one thing that terrified us, to share it online in a week, thereby holding ourselves accountable. I chuckled slightly at the thought of sharing my personal struggles on social media, but oddly, I found the idea liberating. I left the cafe feeling strangely high, illuminated by a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, I contemplated what I could do, not to just follow through but to genuinely push myself. A week later, standing in front of my computer, I finally decided. I posted a video of myself singing, a hobby I'd abandoned after a cruel critique from a peer years ago. My throat felt dry with anxiety as I pressed post, but to my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Encouraged, I began taking small steps towards the life I had been too afraid to pursue. I took an improv class, started painting again, and even signed up for the local community theater auditions. Each action felt like peeling back layers that saturated me with a mixture of doubt and fear. Days turned into weeks, and my social media feed started to transform into a tapestry of my creative endeavors. But it didn't stop there. I felt drawn to Clara, her wisdom beckoning me back for more. I started attending her workshops regularly, where I met others looking to change their lives, all guided under her light. It was intoxicating. But then, that light began to dim. One evening, I arrived at a session only to find the cafe closed, an ominous release sign hanging on the door. Confused, I checked my phone for any updates but found nothing. It was as if Clara had vanished into thin air. Not one to give up so easily, I searched for her online. I dead-ended on forum after forum until finally, I discovered a thread discussing her in a negative light. Apparently, Clara had a history of things far worse than opportunistic motivations. There were whispers of manipulations, of people who had followed her advice blindly only to end up worse off than before. My heart raced. Had I been one of her targets? Had I really let my walls down, only to build them back up stronger than before? I sought out others from her sessions, hoping to find camaraderie, but they had mostly moved on, some dismissing my concerns as paranoia. I became obsessed, diving deeper into her past, uncovering stories of people who felt duped, betrayed. My newfound perspective seemed tainted, and I feared I had merely replaced the old trauma with a new one. What if every success I experienced was built on false foundations? What if Clara had a more sinister purpose beyond helping us? My nights grew restless, filled with visions of her. I began to notice the energies of those around me, the way they carried their burdens, the masks they wore. That spark of hope she initialized began to morph into a shadow that consumed me, leaving me to wonder if I had replaced one form of darkness with another. The night of the final straw arrived when I received a direct message from Clara. It was jarring, an invitation to meet at a secluded park, an old haunt of hers. In her elegant script, she promised clarity, urging me to trust her just one more time. Approaching the park that night, the fog hung low, shrouding everything in an eerie stillness. A sense of unease crept over me. I hesitated. My instincts screamed to turn back, but I was drawn to the possibility of resolution, of reclaiming the hope she'd initially sparked. Instead, I stumbled across something I never expected, a poorly concealed dark side, evidence of a life she had woven around suffering, almost as if she thrived on the emotional upheaval she spiraled us all into. As I stood there, hidden behind the twisted branches, clarity washed over me, and in that moment, I understood my journey wasn't about finding strength through her aid but carving my path amidst the debris. I walked home, leaving behind the allure of a false savior. I had encountered a life coach, yes, but more profoundly, I had encountered myself. I realized I didn't need anyone else to dictate my worth. I am the author of my narrative. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. I was free. I was shunned by my family for choosing my passion. I still remember the day I told them, sitting around the dinner table with that uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she asked if I was serious, if I had truly made up my mind. My father wouldn't even look at me. My siblings sat there, eyes down, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. I had spent years suppressing my dreams, working in the family business, trying to be the son they wanted, the son who would carry on the legacy and make them proud. But it was suffocating, like being trapped in a life that wasn't mine, a life built on expectations that I'd never wanted for myself. So, when I finally told them that I was leaving, that I was done following their rules, their plans, their dreams, the air turned thick with tension, and I could feel their disappointment like a weight pressing down on me. They thought I was throwing my life away, abandoning everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed to give me, for something they saw as a foolish hobby, a fleeting obsession. But it wasn't a hobby to me, it was everything I'd ever wanted, the only thing that made me feel alive. I thought they'd understand, thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd support me, even if they didn't fully agree. But I was wrong. That night, my father told me that if I left, I was no longer part of the family, that I was dead to them. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I could feel my heart breaking, splintering under the weight of his anger and disappointment. My mother just cried, begging me to reconsider, to think about what I was giving up. My siblings sat in silence, their faces blank, their eyes refusing to meet mine. It was like I'd become a stranger, an outsider in my own home. When I packed my bags, there were no goodbyes, no tearful farewells. They just watched as I walked out the door, their faces cold, unfeeling. I tried to convince myself that they'd come around, that they'd see how happy I was, how much this meant to me, but as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the silence from them became deafening. They didn't call, didn't write, didn't check in to see if I was okay. It was like I'd never existed. I threw myself into my passion, working day and night, determined to prove them wrong, to show them that this wasn't a phase, that this was what I was meant to do. But no matter how much success I found, no matter how many milestones I reached, there was always this emptiness, this ache that reminded me of what I'd lost, of the family I'd left behind. I'd see them sometimes, in passing, walking down the street or at the grocery store, but they'd look right through me, like I was a ghost, a shadow of someone they used to know. The pain was unbearable, this feeling of being invisible, of being nothing more than a memory they'd chosen to erase. Then one night, I got a call from my sister, the first time I'd heard her voice in over a year. She sounded scared, her voice trembling as she told me that something was wrong, that our father was sick, that he didn't have much time left. My heart sank, the pain of the past year rushing back in a wave of guilt and regret. I wanted to go to him, to be there for him, to tell him that I was sorry, that I'd never meant to hurt him. But when I showed up at the hospital, my mother looked at me with a hatred I'd never seen before. She told me that I wasn't welcome, that I had no right to be there, that I'd given up my place in the family the day I'd walked out that door. I tried to explain, tried to make her understand that I was still their son, that I still loved them, but she wouldn't listen. She told me that I was selfish, that I'd broken their hearts, that I'd torn the family apart with my choices. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of her words, her anger, her bitterness. My siblings wouldn't even look at me, their faces blank, cold, like they didn't know me. I was alone, standing in that sterile hospital hallway, the sounds of machines and distant voices echoing around me, and I realized that I had truly lost them, that they had cast me out, that I was nothing to them. In that moment, I felt a darkness settle over me, a hollow emptiness that I knew would never go away. I walked out of that hospital feeling like a part of me had died, like I'd lost a piece of my soul that I'd never get back. I went back to my life, to my passion, to the thing that had given me purpose, but it felt empty, meaningless. I'd spent so long trying to prove myself, trying to show them that I was more than their expectations, but in the end, I'd lost everything that had ever mattered to me. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, don't know if they'll ever forgive me. But I do know that the pain of being shunned, of being cast out by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And every night, as I lie awake, haunted by memories of the family I once had, I wonder if it was all worth it, if following my passion was worth the price I paid. I never thought I would be part of a story that would change the lives of two people forever. It was just an ordinary Friday night, the kind where my friends and I would gather in my basement, playing video games and sipping soda. Jay, my best friend since kindergarten, had been unusually quiet. He'd been distant for weeks, and our group had sensed something was off. We had tried to joke him back into his usual self, but every time we brought up how weird he was acting, he'd just give us a forced smile and change the subject. I remember sitting on my worn-out gaming chair, the glow of the TV casting strange shadows across my friends' faces. I glanced over at Jay, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, fiddling with a can of soda. His eyes were trained on the screen, but they didn't seem to be focused on the game. My heart ached for him. I wish I knew what was going on in his mind. As the night wore on, the laughter and video game sounds echoed in the basement, but I felt a heavy silence enveloping Jay. It wasn't until near midnight that things took a dramatic turn. "Hey, guys," Jay said suddenly, his voice breaking the laughter like glass shattering. My stomach dropped. This was it. I could hear the nervousness in his voice, and I felt every set of eyes turn toward him. "I need to tell you something." I leaned forward, my breath caught in my throat, and the room grew quiet. "I've been going through a lot lately," he continued, his words trembling in the air. "And I think it's time I stop hiding." Everyone sat still, tension building. I'm not sure if any of us truly knew what he was about to say. "I'm gay," Jay finally blurted out, and the words hung in the air as if time froze. I could see the conflict on his face, as though he was bracing for the blow of rejection. I held my breath, waiting for some kind of response. My heart raced when I noticed some of our other friends exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable. The silence stretched on, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Then, to my surprise, Kelly, one of our quieter friends, stood up. "Jay," she said softly, "I'm proud of you for saying that. It's not easy." Relief washed over me, and I could see Jay's shoulders relax a fraction. "We're still your friends," Mike chimed in, his voice cutting through the tension. "Nothing changes that." I felt a surge of hope at their responses, but in the back of my mind, dread lingered. Jay took a deep breath, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've been scared that you guys would hate me or think differently of me." "You're still you," I said, finding the courage to chime in. "We love you, man. It doesn't change anything for us." A wave of warmth flooded the basement, breaking the heaviness that had settled over us. Jay managed a smile, and our group erupted into a series of supportive affirmations. I was relieved but still terrified. Despite the support, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was just beginning. As the night wound down, we spent hours talking, reminiscing about old memories and sharing dreams for the future, and I could see the weight slowly lifting off Jay's shoulders. It felt like a turning point, for him and for us. We promised to keep his secret safe for as long as he needed and to be there for him in any way we could. But I couldn't help but wonder how my own feelings were shifting. I felt burdened by the weight of all this knowledge. I wanted to protect him, but I also felt this strange wave of pride, as if by standing up for him, I was coming to realize more about myself. I started to consider how society would react to Jay's new truth. Would his family accept him? Would we face backlash? But for the moment, in that basement with the flickering light and our laughter echoing off the walls, we were just friends, no labels, no fear. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself watching Jay closely. His demeanor brightened, and the carefree Jay I knew returned, albeit in fragments. He started experimenting with his style, wearing clothes that made him feel more authentic. It was exhilarating to watch, but another part of me began to panic. I was developing feelings I had never recognized before, feelings that went beyond friendship. Each time he laughed or flashed that radiant smile, I felt my heart do a somersault. How could I tell him? I remember pacing around my room one night, feeling defeated. I wanted to be open, to support him fully, but fear clung to me like a shadow. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if I jeopardized our friendship? The next week, Jay invited our group to go see a movie, and it just so happened to be the day he planned to come out to his parents. I offered to go with him, wanting to be there for support. His parents had always seemed open-minded, but I felt the tension in his voice when he asked, "Do you think they'll accept me?" He wondered, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've always said they would, but it's another thing to hear it, you know." I tried my best to reassure him. "You're brave, Jay. You'll handle this." He smiled at me, but I could see the fear lingering in his eyes. The night of the movie, he seemed distracted, lost in thought. As the credits rolled, I could feel my own heart thrumming nervously. I wanted to tell him how I felt, but my own terror held me at bay. After the film, we decided to go for ice cream to unwind. As we sat at the small parlor, the atmosphere was thick with nerves and anticipation. I paused, just as he took a bite from his cone, and I said, "Hey, can I tell you something?" He turned to look at me, and my heart raced. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I took a deep breath. "Honestly, I've had some feelings for you for a while now." Jay blinked, his expression unreadable, and I felt like 1,000 butterflies were flapping violently in my stomach. What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it," I blurted out. "I love you, Jay. Not just as a friend." I felt the heat of embarrassment flood my cheeks, but I forced myself to look him in the eye. There, in that moonlit parlor, everything felt suspended in time. I watched as he processed what I had just said, and a strange mix of emotions danced across his face. "Wow," he said, finally. "I didn't expect that." "I know," I hurried to say. "But I've been thinking a lot about it. I want you to be happy, and I want to support you." But I couldn't hide it any longer. The silence that followed felt like eternity, but then, to my surprise, a smile broke across Jay's face, warm and genuine. "You don't know how much that means to me," he said softly. "When I came out to you guys, I was terrified, but hearing you say that makes it so much easier." "So how do you feel?" I asked, my heart racing. "Honestly," he said, his eyes sparkling, "I've been feeling the same way. I just didn't know how to tell you. I kind of thought that since I was just figuring stuff out about myself, I shouldn't even think about something like that." My heart soared as he spoke, and I felt the weight of anxiety slipping away. We talked until the sun began to rise, sharing our dreams and fears. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, and the journey would be far from easy. But just like that night in the basement, I felt hope returning. It was a moment brimming with support and love, not only between friends but something deeper blooming between us. Jay and I faced the world together, learning and embracing our identities while holding each other's hands through it all. And I knew, no matter what happened, we would always support each other, because that, in itself, was its own kind of love. The end.